I'm Michelle Silva. I hail from a two-person, two-cat independent studio called Ska Studios. This is my partner, James, there in the middle, husband and partner. Hello. Dressed up at the local Ren Fair a few years ago when I had hair. We're most known for Dishwasher, Charlie Murder, and most recently, Salt and Sanctuary. So how do I tell you who I am and what I do? It would be easier to tell you what I don't do, but here's a few of the things. Artist, designer, graphic designer, marketing person, biz dev person, many, many things. We wear many hats as indie developers. So more on that in a minute. But first, a little story. Being a teenager is the worst. But what's worse is when a teacher, somebody who's supposed to tell you that you can do anything, you can be anything, tells you, no, you can only be good at one thing. I remember when I was a teenager, a teacher suddenly quizzed me in front of a bunch of elementary students, and I couldn't respond. I froze up, just that instinct to freeze up. And he said, aha, you know those artsy types, because I couldn't answer his math question. As a teenager, I was absolutely mortified, just mortified. And now as an adult, I think back on this, and I obviously has stayed with me, and I'm angry, because if meme culture was around back then, I might have found solace in this tweet. Hang on, I'm not dumb, I'm just panicking. But hang on, I am an artsy type, all right, we can see this. But I was also an IB calculus, that's like AP in the US. I still have the hoodie to prove it, it still fits me. I was in warrior calculus at Edmonds Woodway High. So I may be artsy, but I'm good at other things. I have a BA in fine arts, but I also minored in business. I may not be good at reacting on the spot, but I can be good at more than one thing. So we know this phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. But I want to introduce to you my idea of master of all trades. And as a small studio, we are two people. You have to be able to do this. You have to be good at many things to be able to make a game come together and to ship the game. And it's okay to only want to focus on one thing. If you want to focus on just art, that's great. But it's not the only way. It doesn't have to be the only way. So just like when the teacher assumed I was the artsy type, making these kind of assumptions can be really harmful. When James and I meet new people, they often say, oh, he's the programmer and she's the artist, right? This is not super fair to us. Yeah, he's the programmer, but he does the bulk of the artwork. He's a musician, he has so many more things. And I am an artsy type, but I also run the dang business. And I am not infallible. I have been known to do things like joke about programmer art, ha ha ha. But this is a disservice to both of us. It's a disservice to assume these things. And this starts early, this starts young, and it's perpetuated to adulthood. When I was a kid, I was gifted like girly things, arts and crafts and such, and I do love arts and crafts and such, but I also loved Legos and building toys and things that are considered boys' toys. But I would like to ask, why not both? Why can't I like both things like I do? So self-esteem is a thing. I will freely admit that I am not a very confident person, despite sitting here talking about mastery. And we often disparage, James and I will often disparage ourselves and say, we're okay enough at each thing to make a game, but that's not fair. Because taking the spark of an idea of a game and developing into a fully fledged game and releasing that game, navigating the hellscape that is release, if that is not mastery, proof of mastery, I don't know what is. So celebrate your mastery. We don't need to separate these things. They are integrated. Maths and sciences. It is so important to put these two things together, and especially in video games, like this is what this is who we are. There are jobs that work with knowledge and skills that span multiple fields, and these people are very valuable. And broadening our horizons, so learning something in one field can easily help you in another. And best of all, we are in a golden age of learning. Knowledge is at your fingertips, and there are more and more masters every day. So I just wanted to have a quick visual shout out to some people that I know that are good at multiple things, that maybe they started out in one field and started learning another, or just have always done many things. And this is a few places you can find me, some of my Twitter and Facebook, and a new Instagram account that I've created called Real Alternate Cat Facts. It presents very, very real cat facts, as you can see. So you can be good at more than one thing, don't have to, but your interests can improve each other and build on each other, and you can be a master of all trades.
I am a game creator based out of Osaka, Japan. I've been making video games since 1996. So this year is my 26th. Yeah. By the way, when you want to drink beer, but you don't have a bottle opener, what do? Try your teeth? No, don't tell me you give up on the beer. Don't tell me. Yeah, there's no need for that. There are many ways to open the bottle. I recommend this. A hard and a flat surface, it's super easy. And this, use chopsticks, just like a real Japanese person. Hashtag drink king. When I talk about drinking, I always use this hashtag. So when people come to visit my office, they always bring me alcohol. Everyone. Yes, I am a man who knows how to drink. Now, I'm going to teach you how to enjoy drinking in any situations. Yeah, for example, when you don't have a bottle opener, no problem. Everyone has a key, right? Yeah, so drinking, yeah. But you might not to be able to use this in 10 years, become digital or something. What about this? You drove to the place. Simple. We have Uber. Yeah. Yep, drinking. And what about this? You don't speak the language and have no friends there. Don't worry. Drinking. That's never a problem. Just drink together, and you are already friends, right? You forgot your wallet. You have friends. Yeah, just pay back them next time. And you forgot your ID. Save as ID as a PDF in your phone. Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah, try winking and blowing the kiss. It's work. But there are worse situations. For example, when there's a manipulator at the event, or when someone wants to post everything, or when there are crazy fans nearby. Don't think. Drinking. Yeah. No one can defeat the king. But I ordered an IPA, and they brought me Bud Light. Yeah. Sorry, it's game over. That's the one thing I can't do. Yeah. Never mind, drinking. Switch into a new gear and order a new drink. This is 3 rules. Getting around with alcohols. Find the drink that fit you. Wine or beer or whiskey, a lot of alcohols in the world. Learn about types and makers. Kind of baseball team or football team, like that. Drink expensive alcohol. This is important. What if we can't even drink a drop of it? Drinking. That's okay. As long as you have friends, no problem. Even water can become the best drink with friends. Yeah, yeah. don't make alcohol itself your goal. This is important. By the way, I have a Guinness World Record. And also I have a master license in Buddhism, and I'm living in temple. Yeah, this is true. And sometimes I cosplay, and sometimes I cosplay as a pro wrestler. And I've done 3 sessions at the GDC so far, 3 times. And also, I have a session on this Friday. Please come if you are interested in. That's all. I love you all. Thank you.
You know, I've been a developer for a long time. And even when I was a young kid, when I was making games on the ZX81, I would be very critical about what I was doing and try to polish it and try and get it into a really good state. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and how I find that's really important now as well. A bit of history about myself. So I started programming in 1981 on the ZX81. And then I was programmer on Star Fox at age 19, and which is pretty young. And I worked at Sony PlayStation for 6 years and worked on like the PlayStation 2 and did the Rubber Duck demo and all this kind of stuff back in the day. And then I founded Q Games in 2001 because I always wanted to make a games company. Ever since I was like 12. Finally managed to do that, and that's 18 years now. And then I launched a Pixel Junk series in 2007. Which was really in the early days, really, of indie gaming. Back then, there really were only a few games on, say, PSN or on consoles, I suppose, and it was really kind of like the wilderness. And I've developed and shipped over about 20 original games. Okay, so the reasons to be a harshest critic. There are tens of thousands of games that are just kind of good enough. Sort of they languish, like on Steam and places like that. And even after removing the games that have no hope at all of selling, like just the stuff that really no one put any effort into, even then the average income on one of these games is pretty low. It's about, I think there was a talk at GDC maybe last year or the year before about it, where someone had calculated it, but they said the average income was only about $30,000. So if you spent, say, 2 years making a game, like you're not really earning much from that, and that's the average. And it's no different in the non-indie world as well. I mean, in AAA games as well, there's a lot of stuff out there, and not all of them make money. And so what you make, I think, has to shine very brightly. I mean, nowadays, because of Unity, Unreal, and everything, pretty much anyone can knock up a regular game. And with Unreal, you even get stuff like online multiplayer, which used to be very hard to do back in the day. And just this kind of stuff, this level of ease of entry simply wasn't available just 10 years ago even. And this means, before you'd have to make your own engine and develop things in that direction, and that would help you kind of get above the crowd a bit, because you make like an original engine, you make your stuff look different to everybody else, and it's really good. But nowadays, with Unity alone, you can achieve a level of graphics that would have required rolling your own engine and just a few years back. And for example, when we went to make Pixel Junk Monsters 2 last year, we decided to use Unity, and we just put a lot of polish into it to try and make it really stick out. And this is one of the really big reasons to be your own harshest critic. The internet. It's quite a horrible place out there sometimes, and quite a good place. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It can be very bad. I've been on the wrong end of lots of comments. And the internet is your harshest critic. And very quickly, Steam reviews can be very harsh. They'll focus on the slightest flaw in your game, and this will just snowball out of control and totally scupper your game before it even has a chance. And people who feel strongly about some slightest problem in your game will try and get others to avoid your game, so they can self-justify their own mistake, or so they believe in, so they want to make sure that someone else doesn't purchase the game. And you need to beat the internet. So you need to be as critical about your own work as they are, and probably more so. So you have to criticize your own game as well as the internet does. So I often see problems on teams where devs take things far too personally. And it happens all the time, because you love what you're doing. For example, a piece of art might come up and it doesn't really match the vibe of the game. And being polite and trying not to rub people up the wrong way, you might hint and say, oh, this doesn't quite feel right. But it's a bit too vague, really. And really, everybody should be a bit more clear and more frank about what the ultimate goals are. And if things aren't matching, you should be very clear and try and be as honest as possible. And one way to do this is not to focus on the people involved so much, and focus on what you're making. And I've been made a lot of games, and quite often people get, they kind of think that you're talking about them when you say, oh, this isn't quite good enough. But what you're saying is just this particular thing that they're making isn't quite good enough, and it doesn't quite match the game. And the quicker you can get everybody to understand that all the criticism is just about making what you're all making together a better thing, that's when you start to make a really good thing, like a really good game, I think. So addressing problems before other people do is important. So if you're on a team, and you want to show things to other people on the team, and you want to be very quick at doing that, but you also don't want to show it too early. So my suggestion or my advice is to hold things in a little bit, have a little review by yourself of what you're making, and just make sure that you've kind of filled in all the little gaps that you can by yourself, and then take it to the team, take it to your friends or whoever, and then get their advice, and then feed that back in as well. So it's like a multiple step kind of process. Because obviously, if you make stuff and quickly show it to people, then you're going to get criticism, and you're going to get a lot of criticism, and that might demotivate you. And it's always best to try and make things as best as possible by yourself first. So you also have to criticize the right things. So on all teams larger than just one person, it gets more and more difficult to maintain overall vision. And some people switch off and stop trying to understand, and this leads to an inferior game. And everyone needs to understand the vision. And if you feel you don't need to discuss it with everyone else until you do grasp it, you need to kind of understand, everybody needs to understand that vision and the sort of fundamental side of things. For example, on a game where the goal has always been to create a game where the main character can't jump, then criticizing the game for not having a jump will mean your opinions are kind of quickly rejected. And so you have to kind of understand the situation, understand what you're aiming for when you're making a game, and make sure you criticize the right things in the game. So the game is your legacy, and a good game, this is kind of the last slide, so it's just a small point from my perspective as an old bloke in games dev. If you make a good game, it will last forever, and it will define your career. You will always be able to look back on it, and people will still remember it for a long time, for a long, long time. And even today, people come up to me and say, I love Star Fox or something, and it's like, that was, for me, it's over 25 years ago. So it's kind of a surprise, that people still remember these sort of old games and stuff that I've made. And I think every game you make is going to be, treat it as though it's going to be the most important game that you'll ever make. Because sometimes you might not even get a chance to make another game, and you need to make sure this one counts, and make sure you've made it the best thing you can ever make. And that's it. So thanks for listening. And I'm Dylan Cuthbert on Twitter, so you can always follow me or talk to me or whatever. And I always try and respond to absolutely everybody who messages me. So just say hello and ask me anything you like. So thank you.
So this picture is a representation of me and my work and experiences that I've had at GDC. I write stuff, but also do game design and music. My name is Liz Ryerson. Okay, so because of me feeling kind of deep despair about political realities here in America and abroad, I went back to reading some great music, some books about how some great music by freaks and outsiders and people who survived, like the 80s and the Reagan and Thatcher era, and how they did it. So I read this book, Our Band Could Be Your Life, great book. Same Rip It Up and Start Again about post-punk in the UK by Simon Reynolds. So I was going to do a talk about lessons I learned from that and how we could sort of start a punk movement in games. But it looks like someone already beat me to it. Thank you, Amazon. You really know what the people want, assuming they don't work in your warehouses. Thank you. But this underlies my point that punk has sort of become a cliche. It's become sort of an ironic marketing gimmick or a costume. This is from, I think, Return of the Living Dead movie. It's like Hollywood depiction of punks. And it's the same for words like disruption or resistance. They start from a genuine place, but gradually sort of become subsumed into this like gimmick idea. The context is removed, and it becomes yet another sort of image or place to position yourself and sell your stuff. So the thing is that it meant something completely different in the 70s and the 80s. For many people inside those communities, punk was about opening up the horizons of possibility for people who would otherwise not have the resources to explore it. So it was about sharing resources, and it was about building sort of a solidarity among freaks and outsiders in an increasingly sort of sanitized and hyper-capitalist world that was taking investment and resources away from public spaces and leaving a lot of people basically shit out of luck. But thanks to some stuff that happened here in the US in the 1991, the culture shifted and the meaning of punk music, indie music, and DIY changed drastically from exploring ideas into sort of finding a business model and a brand. This is a quote from Ian MacKaye. So it's sort of relevant because we have a politician here in the US named Beto O'Rourke who says he's a big fan of Ian MacKaye, although I'm not sure he would agree with some of his ideals. But people who are committed to punk as a philosophy that carried through to all aspects of their work were, like Ian MacKaye, were very bewildered by this. There's also a quote from Steve Albini, who's like a producer and musician, where he said, I saw a lot of friends and acquaintances turn their bands, which were previously something they did out of a passion, into a small business. And over the course of doing it, they ended up hating their bands in the way I used to hate my job because it became an obligation. If you hadn't guessed, the thing in 1991 that happened was Nirvana and grunge music breaking into the mainstream. At the same time, at the time, it seemed like this monumental shift in culture. But bands like Nirvana were at a scale of success way larger than like Fugazi or any of those big names in punk. So it was actually kind of a weirdly tragic time for many people. It destroyed thriving subcultures by helping sort of create these cults of celebrity and personality around often very young and self-destructive, usually male figures who are not in any way equipped to deal with their newfound fame. Does that sound familiar to you? Does this sound familiar to you? So video games are in the post-explosion world. Nirvana's happened. Now what? Most kids watch video game YouTubers and more kids watch video game YouTubers and streamers than like network TV. Digital marketplaces have erupted and finding visibility is incredibly difficult. Here's a bunch of games that I like that many people probably haven't heard of. Unfortunately, a lot of people out there haven't gotten the memo. There's a lot of interesting and groundbreaking games coming out, but very little to track any of it or embrace or appreciate it. A lot of people doing groundbreaking stuff just burn out and never come back. Also, critics and publications who have attempted to track this new work in the past have often stopped doing it because no one reads their articles. Here's a few defunct sites, basically. Finding visibility as a critic also means building a business model, because it means surviving, which means focusing on what's already a known quantity to reach the widest possible audience. So oftentimes that means not some new obscure thing that no one knows about. So the little guy kind of gets lost in the shuffle yet again. It's that never-ending cycle, the hand of the marketplace, the big money makers sort of increasingly congeal around this goal of short-term profit to maintain like a larger overhead and expectations on the product they make. And so the power that each individual has compared to like a CEO is extremely small. So we don't really have a situation that fosters like large-scale support of like this kind of innovation or challenging work within the industry. So a lot of the lifeblood sort of gets squeezed out. And a lot of people are just fed up. Like the game industry oftentimes treats its employees as expendable and replaceable by an infinite new stream of young, eager kids because games are popular. And by default, like as a woman or another marginalized group in game industry, you're sort of automatically expected to be an advocate on behalf of the industry, which is something I never really signed up for. I mean, I love a lot of games, like I'm interested in the potential of games, but I didn't sign up to get death threats. And to be honest, I never like really cared about the mainstream industry as an entity. And I felt like it was just kind of assumed that I had to do things in a certain way. So last GDC, I helped co-found what became Game Workers Unite. They're doing a lot of stuff this year. I wrote the zine on the right here. Thank you. I don't want to take too much credit because I haven't been involved for a while, but to Emma and all the other people who are doing stuff this GDC, thank you so much. And you should absolutely get involved with them or other unionization efforts in other fields as well if you have the energy to do so. But this time I'm coming with something a little more existential. So what punk embraces is that being oppositional is not necessarily a bad thing, and it's something that I think we need a lot more of and a lot less fear of offending X or Y person or X or Y career opportunity. We need to be able to say what we believe, and by being oppositional to the powers who are oppressing you, oftentimes you find solidarity and you find your voice. I love this picture, by the way. Look, everything that is worth preserving about the game industry, in my opinion, does not come from, as an entity, Nintendo or Sony or Valve or Blizzard. As a company, we have to get outside of this like fandom for companies mindset, because it's individual people who make that stuff, and it doesn't come from game gods. I had this PC Gamer issue back in the day, by the way, or these like boy genius entrepreneurs or big celebrity rock star CEOs and creative leads who drive Ferraris. That was a big thing for some reason in like the 90s. The lifeblood of the industry, like every industry, comes from the bottom up. It comes from the average worker, average person. I'm encouraged when I see stuff like GameDev.world, which is, I guess, happening next week, and it has a global focus, especially when I think about San Francisco. Inequality is a huge problem in San Francisco, in the US, and globally, and it's obvious that a lot of people are underrepresented here at GDC because of the ticket price, because of travel costs, or because they're literally banned from entering the country. But often even the most well-intentioned stuff is kind of used to create new markets that most people will fail in. So I kind of caution against that sort of aspirational model where it's just about creating a new cult of personality around a new game god or someone like that who do achieve success while most people don't. So international outreach and solidarity has to be followed by sort of a larger and, I think, more radical project. So there's no reason game development should be a miserable process. It should be fun and rewarding. We should be creating a space where exploring the boundaries of self-expression beyond the whims of the market is rewarded and it's fun. And we might have to start small, but we can do this. We can help regular people find community and solidarity in the midst of, let's face it, our pretty hostile and bleak world that doesn't want to give a lot of people anything. So we might have to start small, but we can do that as well. I am like really inspired when I see stuff. I don't know if this is, obviously you're seeing my political beliefs, but when we're in a world where like radical new projects like the Green New Deal are widely popular in the US and a political possibility, and new paths are open for anyone who will put the time to build in the effort for them. And I think we can all benefit from that. So anyway, if you have any ideas on how to help do any of these things in the context of games, please reach out to me. I sort of started a little Discord about this, just like for friends and stuff, for sharing ideas. And anyway, thank you for your time.
I'm Catt Small. I'm a senior product designer at Etsy. I'm an independent game developer. I also help run the Game Devs of Color Expo. That's me on Twitter. Feel free to tweet me. Don't DM me. I'm here today because we need to talk about ethics in this industry. You just heard a person kind of talk about that a little bit, and this really frustrates me to say out loud, but I think it's really true. Look at our problem cousin, the tech industry. If you're on the internet, you know that they've had an array of problems recently, so data breaches, illegal practices, all kinds of misguided efforts in order to learn about their customers so that they can better addict them to their products. And this is caused by their participation in what we like to talk about as the attention economy. So that's an approach that treats human attention as a scarce commodity. We have so much content that's freely available that we have to actually fight for space in people's minds, right? Like we saw a bunch of content that gets created. We don't have actual people who can actually consume it, so that content disappears. And these companies are trying to take up spaces in our lives to this point without consent, so that they can actually find a way to profit. And we do that a lot in games too. We are very guilty of participating in this economy. We need and want attention. We want money, and I get that because we need to survive, right? But I want to talk about how this actually harms people. So my friend Dennis, this is a picture of his hand. He plays Pokemon Go all the time, and I mean actually all the time. This is actually a shot of how he plays Pokemon Go at dinner. We'll be sitting together and he'll just go on his phone at the same time as we're talking, and it's really uncomfortable. And he actually also even plays when he's driving because of this wristband that you see on the right side. And it's terrifying, honestly, but I just have to remember that it's not his fault because he's actually addicted to this game. So we are very used to relying in the games industry on whales in some cases where it's either a big spender of time or money, so it's people who pay for all the things or spend a lot of time in the actual game, and they really want the feeling of winning, and they are willing to pay for it. And maybe you think that whaling is a fine practice, but it turns a lot of players off, actually. So for example, my former coworker, Ben, really wanted to enjoy Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, but he could not just pay for the full game. He had to keep spending a small amount of money at a time, and he ended up quitting it. And I am so like this as well. I hate playing games like that. So if you're like, oh, it's fine, I don't really make games that rely on whales, time is also money, it turns out. So if you are trying to find a way to get someone to spend more time on your project, on your game, you're participating in the attention economy. And that is, as I said, the nature of games. We make things to entertain people, to engage them, but do we need to actually fall into attention economy practices is the question I'd like to bring to all of you. I would say that participating in the attention economy without ethical standards often leads to designers using dark patterns. This is a common phrase that we use in the design industry to talk about interactions that are designed to trick users into things that they don't consent to actually doing. And I am very, very guilty of being tempted to do this in my games as well. So for example, in 2013, I made a game with my friends Chris Algu and Dennis Liao. We were faced with a decision: do we include microtransactions? Do we charge for the game up front? Do we annoy people into buying our game by inundating them with ads? And we decided that we were not going to go the dark pattern route. So we decided to just charge a small amount of money for the game and keep what we felt was our dignity. And ever since that happened, I have personally felt really uncomfortable playing games that have tried to nickel and dime me, as I said. So this experience opened my eyes, and it made me ask myself, how can we be better as people? How can I be better as a designer? So I'm going to share a couple of ways that I've pushed myself to be more ethical in my practice. Firstly, define your principles. By creating standards for yourself up front, you can avoid making evil decisions. Experience principles are something that I use a lot in design as well as games to express a core value behind my project. So what I do is I write down principles so that my work has boundaries and guidelines, and then I also make sure to actually do research so that I understand who my audience is, understand how they think, and what they actually value. And this actually helps me make sure that I'm working within the frame and the space of what they want and need, not just what I need as the person who's building this game to make money, ideally. Second method is to question everything. So it's not just a good idea because everyone else is doing it. I think this is a thing that we're very guilty of as human beings who love to follow each other. But I think it's really important to ask yourself, why is this a good idea? Why does this game need to be so long? Why does replayability to this point have to be required? Why are we using this strategy? Really ask yourself those questions and make sure that you have an answer. Method number 3 is be intentional. Design everything methodically and intentionally. This is not just true for your game's experiences, but also for your goals and your overall strategy. So especially your success metrics, it's really important to ask yourself, what are you measuring and why does it matter? Do you need to measure monthly active users? What actually defines success? Method number 4 is stop incentivizing addiction. It's not healthy, literally unhealthy, and it's not ethical to incentivize people for giving your game a massive amount of their mind share. Game feel or juice is one thing because we need to make games feel good, but employing dark patterns is another, and your game should not be a drug. Method number 5 is get creative. Instead of aiming for quick wins, can you find another way to be economically sustainable? Again, we've talked a little bit about this today, and I personally actually have a Patreon that I run, and I self-fund my work. I don't know how to do this otherwise, but I think we need to ask ourselves these questions so that we can help improve the industry. Because rather than playing into old tropes, I'm sure there have to be ways that we can create new and less evil methods to participate in capitalism. I don't know what those are yet. Capitalism is really terrible, but like we need to figure out a way to do this better. So overall, I am really excited to see us improve and become a more ethical industry because we talk a lot about respecting the player when it comes to things like tutorials. We love to consider their intelligence and treat them like adults when it comes to the actual gameplay. But how do we do the same when it comes to their time? Thank you.
I'm Alan Hazelden, and I'm going to talk about why I think all developers deserve to get royalties. I am the co-designer of some cool puzzle games like Soccer Bond, A Good Snowman is Hard to Build, and Cosmic Express, and I'm working on a new unannounced game, but enough about that. So I really think that this is a moral issue. If you worked on a game, then you contributed to making it happen. It would not exist without you. And if it becomes profitable, that's on you too. And if it becomes very profitable, then you deserve to share in that success. So when I was starting to say to people, I'm thinking about talking about this, some people told me this. They thought, well, Alan, aren't royalties kind of a scam? And surprisingly, I don't actually disagree with this. If you are given a choice between royalties or cash up front, you should almost always take the money. And if you're in a position where you are offering somebody royalties and you're saying, hey, we can't really afford to pay you properly, but don't worry, you're going to get royalties and it'll be great, then you are probably asking that person to take on way more risk than they should be. But the reason I want to talk about this is because royalties should not replace being paid well. You should get royalties on top of whatever you're getting paid, not instead of. And yes, sometimes if you're working on indie teams, people are not getting paid or getting paid friend rates. But that doesn't mean that if that's not the case, that you shouldn't get royalties. That just means that if you're getting underpaid, you should get more royalties. So specifically, this is what I decided to do for the game I'm working on now. Your mileage may vary. This is just an example of how you can do this. So I want people to start earning royalties from the point the game becomes profitable. I define profitability pretty simply. We look at expenses for the game. That's mostly just upfront team payments and some other mostly smaller costs. Crucially, for me, I define this only as those costs that haven't been covered by external funding for the period that my company has been covering costs. From the moment we get external funding, I'm not counting that as expenses to recoup. And then profit is just once the income from the game gets more than what my company has spent on the game. And then everyone gets some percentage of the profit. And this kind of should go without saying, but don't be a dick. There are a lot of ways of defining expenses if you want to make your game look unprofitable. Just don't do it. Personally, my expenses don't include my travel costs. I could justify going because I'm going to places, I'm meeting people, I'm networking, I'm making deals sometimes. But it just feels weird and bad, and it's not going to make that much difference in the grand scheme of things. I go a bit extreme. My expenses that I'm taking out of profit don't include my salary, but that's just because I'm weird. You shouldn't do that probably, but that's what I do. So there's lots of considerations you have to take into account when you're working out what percentage any individual should get on a project. That's way too complicated for a 5-minute talk. If you have employees, then you should still get people royalties, but the percentages could be justifiably lower, and the point at which they kick in could be justifiably higher. Whereas if you're a team of entirely contractors, and after the game's shipped, you'll move on, then the royalties should be much, much higher. If you've got a large team, then that's a lot of people to split it between, but that just means that it might take longer before it adds up. People leaving mid-project is complicated, but there are plenty of teams who have successful games, who have rev share systems, who have accounted for this, who have a system, and they've sorted it out. Obviously, some people will have different levels of contribution or different levels of investment, but you just got to work out a plan for figuring that stuff out and balancing all the factors. None of these are really a reason not to do royalties. It's just a reason to know how much royalties everyone should get and work it out in a way that's fair. So yeah, thanks for your time. I'm Alan Hazelden, and this is me.
I am Kelly Wallick, and this is my talk called Get Me Out of This Hideous Box. Why is this UI so ugly? Why are beautiful games stuffed into a hideous box with tiny font and convoluted menus? What in the world is this? Why would I think that I can discover something that I love through this experience? It honestly feels like no one could be bothered to even try and market to me. Why am I invisible? Or worse yet, why am I treated like I'm some sort of statistical anomaly? I have money. I like video games. I am desperate for content that speaks to me. I am waiting to be seen. Why is the mainstream gaming audience still treated as if it's totally homogenous? Of course you're going to keep ending up with the same audiences if you're only making the same content over and over. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, and it's leaving a whole pile of folks out of the picture. If a new gamer's first experience is complicated, ugly, and careless, why would they think that the games inside of it are going to be any different? And even if the content is out there, just getting to it feels like it requires a fucking degree to figure it out. And it is constantly updating. If I don't play the same game every day, I'll get stuck in an update hell, which means that I need to decide in the afternoon if I want to play a game in the evening, which means I need to plan my entire day around the fact that I might want to play a game at some point, which forces me into a hardcore gamer category when all I really wanted to do was to chill and play my favorite game when I had a little bit of extra time. Holy shit, the Wii sold. The Switch sold. Yes, of course it sold, because it looks like it wants to be your friend. It doesn't look like it's going to be some asshole who wants to quiz you on every member of the band and the first 2 albums that any real fan would totally know about, that, by the way, were not as good, categorically. Get over yourself. This is supposed to be fun, right? Oh, I'm playing it wrong? Oh, I'm a girl who likes video games? Seriously, I've been hearing this same nonsense for 30 years. It's old. I'm tired. The Sims sold? Yes, it sold. The player base is like 70% women. And what do I see when I log in when I want to play The Sims? FIFA? It is not rocket science. People will listen to music that is made by people that they identify with. They will watch movies with characters that look like them. They will play a video game that appeals to them, to their interests and to their identity. They will play a video game that identifies with them. It's allowing people to make content for their own audiences, created by the people who actually understand what they're representing. Stop letting men write female characters, and especially stop letting them say, well, I have a daughter. Stop letting white people write people of color. Hire the people who have these actual lived experiences to write their own goddamn characters. And start giving money to a diverse set of creators to make these games. We will all make more money. It is really honestly stupid business sense to do otherwise. It makes no sense. The amount of effort that we're putting into keeping people out is a wasted effort. Imagine if all that effort was just putting into allowing everyone to contribute and participate. How much further along we would all be. How much cooler all of the video games would be. So, I don't know about you, but this is all making me feel a little bit stressed out. So, how about we all take a quick wellness break here? I'm going to ask everyone to close your eyes. We're all going to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Let your jaw relax. Create some space between your eyes. Let your shoulders drop. And picture a mountain. The roots run deep into the earth. It's solid and still. The clouds move past. The wind blows across the peak. But the mountain has been here for millions of years. Calm and still. Take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. All right, let's get back into it. The thing is that indies get this. I get this. You get this. But we all struggle for funding. We struggle for attention. We create with little support or infrastructure. For those of you with the funding, fund this content. Fund these creators. Fund stuff that might not make sense to you. Or better yet, that is not made specifically for you. Get a cultural and social lens and fucking use it. Accept that a bunch of it might fail, and let that be okay. We have to start looking at the long term and stop reacting to the short term. We have to create conditions for success and for failure. You have to stop expecting a handful of diverse people to succeed as a representation of their entire gender, race, cultural, or sexual identity the second that you give them any ounce of opportunity. It is an impossible standard. It creates confirmation bias, and it is not expected of anybody else. Meet people who aren't you. Stop doing business at 2 a.m. while you're drunk so that more people feel safe doing it. Work with us here. You can't keep leaning on the people at the bottom to fix your problems. And you can't keep only paying attention to us when you need content for a new platform. Think real change, real investment, real support, and real solutions. Get us out of this hideous box. Thank you.
My name is Mwaaba Mugala, all the way from Zambia, and this is my talk, Video Games and the African Identity/Culture. So who am I? Like I said, my name is Mwaaba Mugala. I'm the owner and co-founder of a studio called Epic Arts. I was one of the winners of the Digital Lab Africa competition last year, and I'm currently working on a psychological horror game called Project Lumpa, which is based on Zambian mythology and lore. That's the picture, and that's a random picture of the whale. So why did I pick this topic? In my years of playing video games, I rarely saw my country or continent represented well, and it really bothered me for such a long time. This was the first time I saw Zambia in a game, and I won't even mention which game this is, but yeah, we have guns like that. So most games we played and most movies we watched growing up were mostly American, British, or Japanese, and we learned a lot from these, more than we learned about from our own country. I remember seeing and learning about Athena and Zeus from God of War. The first time I knew about a Ford Mustang or Porsche Carrera GT was the car I wanted to own one day when I played Need for Speed with my friends. Most of these things were new to us and was so intriguing because we learned so much from them growing up. So my point is this: video games have been able to give me an experience I would otherwise have not had as a kid. They literally brought other parts of the world to my fingertips. God of War had me reading about Greek mythology. Need for Speed had me and my friends arguing about what's better between tuners and muscle cars. And the problem is this: my country has 73 different tribes. 73. I'm Zambian, born and bred, and I've never encountered most of these tribes, like not even 20%. Each of these tribes have their own history, their own culture, their own stories. And this is just one country out of the other 53 countries in the continent that's still yet to carve out its own narrative in a world that's becoming complacent to retreat to older, already established narratives. And now, because of its accessibility, one of the ways to get these stories out is through video games. It's one of the ways Zambians, Africans, can bring the world to the fingertips of people in other parts of the world, the same way they brought the same way they brought their stories to our fingertips. I want to see kids from other places like Norway or Argentina talk about, the Mwaaba rock paintings, the dances of the Nyao, each mask, each feather, telling a different story, and not seeing stories of people always shooting Africans for some minerals that we've never heard of, but it applies because this game has to happen. We need more of these type of stories in African video games. We need more of this type of African games to tell our stories in order to preserve our culture, because right now, video games are linked into our world in a way that's irrevocable. You just cannot deny how much of an influence they have in our lives, which is why I'm very passionate about bringing more studios from Africa, from Zambia, to the outside world, because right now, more of these games are focused on bringing African mythology and stories to the outside world, and it's a great way to preserve our culture so that kids in our future kids, our kids' can also keep these stories and tell their friends about what happened in the past, rather than focusing only on books, movies. So we also need video games to keep our stories intact. And yeah, that's my talk.
I'm Kara Stone. I'll be talking today about mental illness and making games. There's 3 different entrances into this conversation, and for each I'll talk about a game or an art piece that I've made. The first is representation. In The Earth is a Better Person Than Me, we follow Delphine, a young femme who is going through a crisis and runs away from her problems and into a forest. She finds that she can talk to the environment around her. She talks to the moon about love and not understanding the cycles of her emotion, to dirt about suicide and self-hate, and to the flower about perfectionism and self-harm. I like to think that it shows a specific but dynamic representation of a woman living with mental illness. This is an example of how we represent mental illness in video games and those who are mentally ill. It's also the most common way about thinking about mental illness and video games, but it's just one facet. Another is process. This isn't a game, but the very first project I ever made where I was open about my experiences with mental illness. It's called Polaroid Panic. I carried a Polaroid camera with me for 3 months, everywhere, all the time, and took a photo of my face each time I had a panic attack. The pictures are material proof of a feeling, but a feeling that the viewer may not be able to read onto my face. All this process took was to carry a small camera bag and to be in touch with my emotional state. Of course, this is not how we're usually making media. We're working in a culture that normalizes and valorizes overwork. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the term crunch, and you know not to do it, but you do it anyway. Sometimes our bosses say that we have to. Sometimes we feel like we have to. Sometimes it even feels good because we're performing as good, productive citizens of capitalism. But overwork is bad for all of us, and it's worse for some of us. Those of us with certain mental illnesses, psychosocial disability, mental and invisible disabilities, chronic conditions, may not be able to work like that. The energy drain happens faster, the recovery is slower, and the repercussions more detrimental. Big indie studios, small indie studios, co-ops, collectives, and even individuals really need to check their expectations of labor and productivity. Productivity isn't worth the debilitation. And that means we need to create new models of game making. And I believe that we can create a process that actually benefits us, a reparative process like I did here in Polaroid Panic, where the end result was me being more in touch with my feelings, open about sharing them, and not being able to disregard them. The last is design. This is another piece that took me a long time to make, but I didn't mean it to. I've been working on Ritual of the Moon for over 4 years when I thought it would be 1. It's finally to be released on the full moon next month in April. The game takes place over 28 days, real-time days. where the player plays for 3 minutes a day, where you arrange objects on an altar, receive a mantra for the day, and then you make a choice based on your personal emotional state at that moment, if you want to destroy or protect the Earth from a comet that's about to hit it. The game tracks your choices in a calendar, acting like a mood chart for the month. I wanted to make space for ritual, for short plays that we can integrate into our lives, that's slow and meditative, that make us reflect on our emotional state and not cause anything frustrating or panicky. Many of us rightly are criticizing labor practices that expect us to work 80 hours a week, but we want to make games that take 80 hours to play, straight, with no breaks. That's how they're designed. Many video games actually reinforce overwork. We think of a good game as a game that you want to play all the time. We design so there's a constant pull to keep playing. This is done most often by activating panic and aggression, frustration, momentary gratification, and then looping this over and over and over. We try to emotionally manipulate the player so they play more. But these are just a few of the emotional possibilities of games. What if we made games that activated melancholy or self-reflection or tenderness? I think that these need to be designed differently than the way that we design for panic, aggression, frustration, and gratification. It's not as simple as making a game about a tender and soft person and expecting the player to feel the same, but designing mechanics and gameplay and even controllers differently to bring out different feelings of tenderness and care, and using a process of game creation that does the same for us, the makers. I think games are emotionally powerful, and it's time we start channeling that power into a wider emotional landscape. We need to make reparative games, games that help us heal. Thank you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about deadlines, and I actually did have a disclaimer already written in here, and now I need to make sure that I'm very clear about it. This is not an advocate for working yourself into the ground or burnout or chronic systemic mismanagement. I just want to reflect on the value of deadline as something that furthers creative process and moving projects forward. So I think that deadlines are generally reviled. I've certainly had my share of trouble with them. I think we look at them as a villain in the room. There's something external that's imposed upon us. They can sort of frustrate us, especially as creative people, because we view them as things that limit us and that box us in, that prevent us from doing our best work, or constrain us to a timeline that's uncomfortable. I think part of the problem, though, is that a deadline or a limitation is really a reflection of our inability or our reluctance to take what is a perfect idea for a game or an illustration or a piece of writing or music and make it imperfect by bringing it into the world. It's a messy, very, very difficult process. It's fraught with pitfalls, and I think having a timeline put on that inherently makes us uncomfortable. I think that we've framed stress and anxiety as purely destructive things, and I'm not convinced that that's actually correct. I think that comfort as a pursuit purely for its own sake has become something in North American culture anyway that's become a focus for us. And as biological entities, we're actually not designed to be constantly comfortable. It makes us slow. It puts us in this like non-committal procrastination, which is almost what happened to me making this talk. I'm very happy that Ryan said that Friday I had to get it all done, because I'm not sure that I would have had it all done on time if I didn't have a deadline. Many times when I meet someone who's starting a project or fantasizing about leaving their super cushy job at a large developer or publisher, I can tell if they're actually going to follow through with it or if their project is ever going to get done based on how they frame it. If they're looking for escape, for a wide open field with no limits, constraints, nothing to drive them, I know that what they're doing is they're fantasizing because they're stressed at work, which is a destructive form of stress. This is I think Obi-Wan Kenobi said it, I'm not sure. But it's one of my favorite quotes. And it resonates really powerfully with me because certainly, I mean, this is a bit of a soapboxy rant, so I can only really speak about my own experience, but I prefer some form of structure, and this quote has always really resonated with me because I oftentimes consider what a world without limits would look like. I worked at a large North American developer who also makes consoles. And I did a stint doing character design there. And I had come in from freelance. So I was like, I had a kid. I got laid off of my other AAA job a week before my son was born. And I just immediately started freelancing. And it's a very validating experience to like catch and kill your own food. Like I would start Monday, I'm like, we got no money. And then I have to go out, find a client, do the work. And it makes you feel like you're in shape in a way, like, you're kind of in fighting form. So I walked in my first day and it was like these people were in molasses. They had a 4-person standing meeting at a guy's desk to discuss the level of specularity on mud for a prototype. This game got canceled. They were surprised. I was there for 6 months and they were all like, oh God, guys, what are we gonna do? They're gonna shut it down. I'm like, the mud's still not done, So imagine a world where you had limitless money. You had an army of people that would do whatever you say. You had limitless time. Would it really be your best work? I don't know that it would. I think a bit of discomfort, and again, I want to really underscore this. I am not advocating for death marches. They have the opposite effect. They ruin people. It's 100% true. But a bit of stress, a bit of discomfort is important, I feel, for creative people because there is power there. It alerts us, it excites our senses, and it creates discomfort that forces decisive action. Sometimes it's important to be put to a decision, and because that generates forward momentum on a team. Stress is really a modern word for an ancient phenomenon that's related to evolved adaptations that detect threat and damage to well-being, and it mobilizes us to respond to them. If we're never stressed, we're never mobilized. So I really encourage people to think about how they view deadlines and other limitations and learn maybe not to love them. I mean, Darth Vader is pretty ugly when you pop the mask off, but at least respect them. I think momentum on a team, especially larger teams, is very, very difficult to generate and sustain. And I think pushing people forward, creating responsible ethical limitations within which creative work can take place is how we're going to get the very best out of ourselves and our teams. Deadlines and limitations create necessity and urgency, as I've said. They're invaluable tools, and I hope that they lead to a lot of great inventions for you. But please don't kill your teams, and I mean that. That's my talk.